Welcome to the Robinson Hewitt Pod. I'm Alison Mackie. I'm an anthropologist of emerging technology and water governance director and futurist. Today, we're going to talk about something a little bit on the hot topic when it comes to emerging technology. So, things are constantly changing in the emerging tech world, as we know. It is emerging for a reason. So, today we're going to look at how small and intentional choices today can help guide AI safety through all the hidden risks. It's like steering a ship past icebergs. And so today we're going to be focusing on how we can create form to things, have ethical oversight, as well as public and community participation in how we shape technology deliberately rather than letting it evolve on its own and by default. So about Robinson Hewitt Consulting, about us. So we're here to transform the traditional with the unseen for the next era of innovation and ideas. We bridge the gap between digital and human, blending technology, strategy, and future systems thinking with applied ethnographic research to enable human-centered innovation and transformation. So all that together, our vision and mission basically is to be a trusted source of insight and inspiration for the next generation of founders and ideas. So we hope today we can help hold this vision, a new pathway and strategy for a better future for humanity and the planet. And I hope today is the beginning of that because I feel like we had this massive shift in the news recently when it came to Anthropic and Claude. And I don't know, I just feel like today is going to be a really cool topic to kind of dive into. And I want to start this off by thinking about steering the ship of AI. If we were to think about artificial intelligence and emerging technology to be like a ship, how are we steering it? So when we face any type of change, we often have this tendency to swing between extremes. Is it fight or flight? Or do we freeze? So with technological change, we either accelerate without hesitation, kind of like the dot-com bust, or we shape, or we call for its collapse and retreat and allow things to, like the shape of things to kind of, I don't know, fall away and crumble sometimes. This all kind of came about with this idea of perfectionism and this idea of needing to get something done, and that often having this underlying need for impulse. So we try to build things like an unsinkable ship, and we create form in a way that feels controlled and complete, yet the rigidity and the hubris of humankind that can sometimes get in the way can blind us with these unseen challenges that lie ahead. And I think this happens with almost every single sort of technological change, technological revolution, or new sort of advancement. We get a little bit hubris. But yeah, if we think about that in terms of the Titanic, it was one of the most elegant designs, and the concept of it being bigger doesn't always mean better, and often it doesn't always guarantee safety. So an iceberg is hidden just beneath the surface. And the challenge of an iceberg is that you can't see how big it is underneath. And, it only shows a fraction of that type of risk. So when a ship encounters an iceberg, it doesn't have to always abandon the voyage. We can adjust its direction, and sometimes by only 1 or 2 degrees. So the subtle correction, if we make it early enough, can determine whether our journey continues smoothly or if it ends in collision. And I want to kind of bring up this idea of one of my favorite leaders in history. And I want to talk about Ernest Shackleton, who, even though they hit packed ice on the Trans-Antarctic expedition with the ship Endurance in 1914 to 1917, for 2 years they were adrift. They were stuck in packed ice, and it became, instead of an expedition of exploration of the Antarctic, it became a survival journey. And surprisingly, every single crew member survived this 2 year drifted away in packed ice. And I think it was about a month after Shackleton decided to abandon ship that it finally did sink. So why I really want to bring up Shackleton is even if we do hit packed ice and our ship does sink, we can all survive. And that comes with re-strategization as well as dedication to protecting your men. And I think that was kind of a misstep with the Titanic. I know we're really talking about ships here, but that was a misstep when it came to the Titanic. it wasn't to save all men, right? Even in the design, it wasn't to save all men. Yet with Shackleton, every single man survived. So if we think about subtle course correction and re-strategization, if we make that early enough, this can determine whether our journey can continue smoothly or if it does end in collision. So artificial intelligence and the acceleration of tech today, we're at this point of that navigation. And it's not a question of whether this emerging technology will shape our future, because it already is. But we do need to think about, do we have enough life rafts on board the ship if we do hit the ice? And it's more about, like this point of navigation, it's not be all end all. And I think the question does kind of move beyond default. I think that, we're at this point of we need to start taking some considerations into public hands rather than those who supposedly know it all. So if we choose our direction deliberately, we may only need to shift things by a couple of degrees as we currently are right now. There is always a road back home. I want to kind of preface that of, we are early enough in this journey. I truly believe this. We're early enough in the journey that all roads will end up the same. It's just what path do we take? Do we take hitting the iceberg or do we hit packed ice? Do we start building more life rafts or is it just for women and children, right? It's kind of one of those sorts of things. I should probably stop with the iceberg theory. But anyways, right now our direction is becoming visible, and I think the recent events of this tension are now coming into view. So when Anthropic declined to remove safeguards, preventing its systems from being used to fully create autonomous weapons or mass domestic surveillance, it did trigger a huge political and public response. So contracts were started to be terminated, accusations are seen across the board, and within hours, a competing company secured a defense agreement. But with this, we also saw a huge public shift towards using Claude and Anthropic tools. So this goes beyond commercial and political disputes. This has revealed cracks in systems of our modern day's realities. So if AI does become more embedded within defense, I'm not really keen to talk more about defense, but if it does, and as well as infrastructure and governance, our ethical boundaries are no longer just theoretical, but they're also operational. So we're moving away from just being about those at the top making decisions. It has to go to operations. So if you think about a business structure, right, you have the governance and you have operations. And I think the strategy needs to be trickled down into operational thoughts. So when these boundaries are being tested, we have to discover who's steering the ship. We have to see who's actually making all the decisions. And does it have to be a top-down approach? Or could it be a little bit more distributed? So these moments are not signs of, the system collapsing or the world is ending. It's about having all the cards on the table at the same time to show where are we negotiating our future from? Are we evolving and beginning a new process? Or are we taking shape to things with structure and limits that are restrictive? We need to be more responsive to these forces and who's making the decisions. Again, taking the iceberg theory, we only see the tip of the iceberg. We don't know what's underneath the surface. All cards need to be on the table, and I think we're starting to see that. And I think Anthropic just opened a big door to see what's happening behind the scenes. So again, I kind of want to bring up this idea from my last webinar. We were talking about tools and agents and the shape of autonomy. The last webinar was more about consciousness, but I do want to kind of bring in this idea of autonomy and what is the governance and ethics around that. So part of this urgency does need to come from this lack of distinction when it comes to the different types of artificial intelligence, because not all AI is created the same. So again, as I said in our last webinar, we talked about the two distinct differences that I see when it comes to AI. The first is AI as tools, which I like to call the twigs and sticks. So these are the systems that assist us, that generate and augment human capacity. So these technologies expand creativity, productivity, and insight. And then we also have agents. So these are the systems that operate with increasing autonomy. They monitor, act, and they eventually make decisions within defined parameters. As AI becomes ambient and embedded across platforms, institutions, and physical environments, the presence of agents will shape everyday life in significant ways, but very subtle. The way that I've often talked about ambient AI over the years is I see it being able to kind of, it sounds really funny, but like be able to float across different platforms and different devices and things like that. Ambient AI is what I would just kind of consider it to be like a little fairy, to be honest. It's something that doesn't hold into traditional structure. And I feel like if you were to kind of, oh God, I don't know if I get into it, but again, that idea of the safe rails and the safeguards around that, it needs to be protected. But I digress. So in our last webinar, which I will link it below, I also discussed this concept of consciousness and the need for strong human-like safeguards around these technologies. The governance that is required for these tools is not the same that is required for AI agents. A little course correction here doesn't mean halting progress, however. It means instead that instead of responding in fight or flight, we respond with calculated freeze to hit the pause button completely and recollect our thinking while we still have a chance. So this means clarifying where autonomy is appropriate and where human oversight must remain central and where the ethics limits are non-negotiable. It is an act of deliberate shaping and creating form with foresight that we avoid the packed ice and the icebergs that float ahead. So how do we avoid passive progress? A couple of months ago, I went to this this lecture at bars hosted by Auckland University. It's a global sort of initiative, but I went to one specifically with Auckland University, and the amount of, I don't want to be ageist here, but boomers who just turned up, who specifically were so intrigued by learning but were just kind of hands up and were like, oh, we've accepted, all these things. And it was quite passive responses, but there was a thirst for knowledge. So this is kind of the premise of this thinking. So societies historically rarely make sweeping decisions about technological infrastructure in one defining moment. It's not a yes or no moment. It happens organically, right? And over time. So instead, we accept incremental changes until cumulative effects become structural and we're kind of left with accepting things. This can be expressed through our understanding of surveillance. This expanded very gradually. Our data collection was normalized very fast as well, and platform dominance consolidated before people fully understood the long-term implications of posting a child's face on Facebook, right? Things like that. So each step in this progress and process over the last, 20 years of the internet and widespread data collection has been quite manageable. But the shift was totally transformative. The way that we operate in society and operate in day-to-day life has changed. And I think, only people who are in the know of what is actually happening with this technology and data and things like that are kind of more self-aware than possibly someone who isn't as educated. But we're at a time where AI is moving faster than those previous transitions. And if our governance and public understanding lag too far behind the deployment, of the systems, it's going to be a little bit harder to consent to things meaningfully once they're fully established. So the iceberg in this scenario isn't the innovation itself. It's the momentum without truly understanding and having the education to make sort of grounded decisions. So even if the hidden bulk of the iceberg is underneath, these are the risks and the challenges we cannot see. These are the parts that may hit our ship. This is to remind us that form is only useful if it's paired with adaptability and awareness, and that all comes from, in my opinion, open access, dialogue, education, knowing all cards are on the table, making really clear decisions about where we go next, and having it one where it's distributed rather than hierarchical. So here we have a different model for direction setting. If we I have this thing of like, if we know where we want to go, you can change things only 1 or 2 degrees and it can change the outcome completely, right? So if a 1 degree shift is possible right now, where does it begin? And how do we do this? And I truly believe it begins with public participation. So imagine if we had universities or a community group opening where we could convene and talk about AI governance, having true experts explain in accessible language the implications of autonomous systems in defense and civic infrastructure and everyday life. Having these community lectures can take place not only in informal halls, but also in local spaces like libraries, town centres, civic venues, or even a bar like I attended a couple of months ago. This is where the discussion can remain non-partisan and grounded in shared learning. I believe that, I come from this background, by the way, of having organized organizations talking freely about things, but they're often sponsored and they're often hidden behind political agenda. Annoying, but it's kind of true. It's hard, I'll digress. But this is where I truly believe that education precedes regulation, and our understanding also precedes voting. So from here we have these kind of a little summary of like a few propositions that we can kind of talk about. So it's like, what is the role that autonomous systems should play in military contexts, in defense? What constitutes acceptable surveillance? Where are most human insights remaining central? And how should ambient AI be governed within public infrastructure? And what is it seeing of our personal lives as well? So these mechanisms are inspired by what I like in my own little background is decentralized governance frameworks. So this is seen as DAOs, so a decentralized autonomous organization. I believe that this is a great way forward. It can support transparent, audible community decision-making, and doesn't act as a replacement of democratic institutions or, traditional political structures, but as complementary tools that increase visibility and trust in collective outcomes. So this is a way that we can get collective insight together to vote on things. And it's distributed, it's decentralized, and yeah, basically the objective isn't to politicize AI at all. I don't think it should be. I think that we should have it democratized in its direction. And so in doing this, we can create the form intentionally, constructing systems that is robust yet flexible enough to adapt to the unseen challenges that are ahead, and not have that swayed by a business that is looking for profit or a political party that's just looking for power. So the path that shapes this culture is to understand where the destination is. And I truly believe that comes from people who have studied this, people who actually know what they're talking about, and not people that are, I'm an anthropologist, this is what my study has been about, but not those who have been profiting off of this. Should be people that are researching this truly. But let's talk about the pathway. So technological destinations are often framed as inevitable, but the architecture isn't. And the pathway isn't either. We have free reign in this world. Did you know that? We have free will to kind of do as we please. And I think that we forget that. We do have autonomy. We vote people in, right? We vote with our dollar as well. So people have the power. And it's time to remember that. And I think a lot of people choosing to use, take a switch to using Claude with Anthropic is huge. So let's think about the formative years of personal computing as well. What if we didn't have Microsoft? What if we had a different operating system that was built? What if there was a different sort of business that was modeled? How would society look today without Microsoft? That's kind of a question I like to think about all the time. Yes, we have Apple, but what if there was no competition? What if there was another operating system? What if it wasn't Bill Gates? something to think about. We have that opportunity right now. And so I wonder if we would have arrived at a different society, regardless of who that person was or what was built. Is society predetermined? Then do we have a chance right now to kind of change things? So if we do have this opportunity, AI now occupies this very similar formative position in time and technology. The choices that we're making in this early integration can not only influence the norms around privacy, autonomy, and power, as well as accountability for decades. So one or two shift in like our approach to this today can totally redefine our journey ahead of us as a society and how we integrate with AI. So going back to the beginning of this topic, it's not about perfection. It's more about forming the ship and the structure around it to navigate both the visible and the hidden icebergs ahead of us. And, having a plan to miss packed ice altogether. So let's move beyond acceleration for its own sake. I've worked with a lot of startups and I love founders and I love tech geniuses, but there is this, I don't know what it is. There's this sort of personality trait of going hard and fast. And I don't know if that's like a true trait or if that's just a consequence of the past and culture. But I feel like there has been this rush to treat artificial intelligence like, startup culture in the next .com, right? To scale quickly and go for capital value and things like that, as well as, I don't know, just kind of like integrate as fast as possible. But I don't believe that's that's the right approach and the way ahead. I feel like sustainable systems require more than just acceleration and capital raises. I think they require legitimacy. And a future-facing approach would prioritize things like clear distinctions between augmentation and autonomy, would have very transparent ethical red lines, would have very broad public education, as well as cross-sector dialogue beyond commercial incentives, and finally governance models that incorporate distributed decision making. So it's not about resisting the innovation, but kind of dealing with it with the right foresight and designing it with enough life rafts and also having a good compass with us so that we can be totally adaptable for whatever comes ahead of us. So this is all about steering the ship and not coasting. We're not powerless observers in technological change. We're not at the whim of one person with a big brain. We have to realize that we have our own autonomy and our own ability to make decisions for ourselves and come to consensus as a community. So we need to make sure that the decision remains in human hands. And, right now the iceberg is visible. We just saw that so transparently. And, the conversation is very public right now as well. So what is the tension between capability and the constraint when it's no longer abstract? And this is the moment that we've been waiting for. I mean, it feels small, but every little move from now on can be so effective. And I don't know what's around the corner. I have a few feelings, but we can start to see how this will unfold. Do we centralize the power of it, or do we strengthen the distributed agency and choose the few degrees towards the end goal that we want, our destination? It's not going to be a really big dramatic moment, but I do hope that we can find a way to kind of bring free resources available to the everyday person. But it's also about realizing that we have to empower those around us to make the right decisions, not right decisions, but the decisions that are empowered for their own vision of a future as well. And it doesn't have to be from a hierarchical sort of place of acceptance. I feel like if we can create without rigidity, we can ensure that the voyage ahead is one that is safe, even if the iceberg below is a little bit bigger than we imagined. And I think it might be. So that was my little thought piece today. This has been on my mind for a very long time, and I had sort of thought that March is going to be a really big month when it comes to AI. Anthropic, I believe, opened a door, and I think that's not the end of the conversation. I think that if we do put a pause and we put a freeze on our thoughts, I do believe that we have an opportunity to ask experts that aren't motivated by, a business venture or, a political reason. I feel like if we can educate the everyday person with free resources, make it accessible, put the power back into the people's hands, do it with distributed consensus, and realize that there has to be a compromise at the end of the day. Where we're going, the destination will always be the same, but it's up to us to decide how we get there. So you can find more about RobinsonHewitt Consulting. We're here to build the next era. So we work at the intersection of anthropology, emerging technology, and long-term systems change by helping future-facing leaders and founders and businesses transform, evolve, and build the next era. You can start your journey with us today. If you're still orienting, we have free resources available to start your founder's journey, to tell your own story, and to kind of go through the sort of more psychological elements of being a founder. We also have a future-facing framework that is built and designed to be your sort of structural North Star, to kind of put you in the place of facing the right direction. So if you're ready to take the leap, we have a few services. We have future-facing workshops. We also do strategic redesigns, projects, as well as advisory retainers for executives and boards. So be inspired and be transformed. You can visit our website for all the resources, insights, and next steps. And I will see you in the next one. Ciao.